I'm convinced, after 30 plus years now of marriage and family counseling, that there's fundamentally 5 ways to express love emotionally. I call them the 5 love languages. Love is something you do for somebody else, not something you do for yourself. Any relationship can be enhanced if we learn people's love language and we choose to speak it. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Dr. Gary Chapman, author of The 5 Love Languages and numerous other books on marriage. I've been involved in marriage and family counseling now for over 35 years. I'm going to tell you up front what I hope is going to happen in the brief time that we spend together. My first desire is that your relationships will get better. Relationships either get better or they get worse. They never stand still. And I certainly hope that your relationships will not get worse. I hope they're going to get better. The second objective I have is that you will learn some things that you will find so helpful that you will want to share them with your friends and help them have better relationships. So our topic is the most important word in the English language and the most confusing word in the English language. I say that love is the most important word because if you look at our music, if you look at our literature, if you look at our movies, if you look at our religions, you will find that love is a central theme in all of them. But it's a confusing word because we use the word love in 1,000 ways. We say, for example, I love hot dogs. And then we say, I love my mother. I think there's a difference, hot dogs and mothers, but we use the same word to talk about 1,000 things. Now, I'm not going to discuss 1,000 ways in which we use the word love. I'm going to discuss only one way in which we use the word love, and that is love as an emotional need. I agree with Dr. Ross Campbell, psychiatrist, who said, inside every child there's an emotional love tank. And when the love tank is full, that is, the child genuinely feels loved by the parents, the child grows up normally. But when the love tank is empty, the child grows up with many internal struggles. And in the teenage years, the child will go looking for love, typically in all the wrong places. But I believe that adults also have a love tank. And if you're married, the person you would most like to love you is your spouse. In fact, if you feel loved by your spouse, the whole world looks bright. But if the love tank is empty and you feel like they don't love me, they wish they weren't married to me, the whole world can begin to look dark. So what we're going to talk about is how to keep the love tank full in a marriage, with children, and in all of our relationships. The question is, how do you communicate love so the other person will feel loved? I'm convinced, after 30 plus years now of marriage and family counseling, that there's fundamentally 5 ways to express love emotionally. I call them the 5 love languages. I want to share them with you and show you how they work in a marriage, and you will readily see how they work in other relationships. Love language number 1, words of affirmation. Using words to affirm the other person. Ladies, has your husband said anything similar to this in the last week? You look nice in that outfit. Husbands, has your wife said anything similar to this in the last week? Ooh, do you ever look tough tonight? Try that one on. Words that affirm the other person. The power of the tongue. You know, there's an ancient proverb that says life and death are in the power of the tongue. You can kill your spouse or give them life by the way you talk to them. Words of affirmation. A second language is gifts. My academic background is anthropology, the study of cultures. We have never discovered a culture in which gift-giving is not an expression of love. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. Now, the gifts need not be expensive. Haven't we always said it's the thought that counts? But I remind you, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. You know, guys, you can get a nice card for $5. Can't afford the card? Do you remember how you fold the paper, take the scissors, open up the heart, and write, I love you? Or you can get flowers free. Just go out in your backyard and pick one. You don't have any flowers in your backyard? Your neighbor's yard. Ask them. They'll give you a flower. That's what your children do. How many mothers have ever received a dandelion from your kids? Yes. Now, guys, I'm not suggesting dandelions, okay? A third love language is acts of service. Doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. Cooking a meal is an act of service. Big act of service. Incidentally, anybody still cook? A few of you cook. Cooking a meal is an act of service. Washing dishes is an act of service. Who does that at your place? Yeah. Getting white spots off the mirror. Vacuuming the floor. Washing the car. Mowing the lawn. Anything that you know the other person would like for you to do. Acts of service. A powerful communicator of love. Number 4 is quality time. By which I mean, you give the other person your undivided attention. I don't mean sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about sitting on the couch with the TV off, looking at each other and talking. Do you all have couches? What do you do with those things? Have you ever tried this? Sitting on the couch with the TV off, looking at each other. It can be scary at first. And talking to each other. Are the two of you taking a walk down the road, just talking with each other? Or going out to eat, assuming you talk with each other? Incidentally, have you noticed in a restaurant, you can almost always tell the difference between dating couples and married couples. Dating couples will look at each other and talk. Married couples sit there and you'd think they went there to eat. If I sit on the couch with my wife and give her 20 minutes looking, listening, interacting, I have given her 20 minutes of my life, and she has done the same for me. It's a powerful communicator when you give someone your undivided attention. Love language number 5 is physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies and hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. And long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. Now, in marriage, I'm talking about holding hands. I'm talking about kissing. I'm talking about embracing. I'm talking about the whole sexual part of the marriage. I'm talking about arm around their shoulder. Or driving down the road, you just put your hand on their leg. Or you're sitting around the house and they walk by and you just trip them. I'm kidding. Physical touch is a powerful communicator. Now, listen to me very carefully. Out of the 5 love languages, each of us has a primary love language. We can receive love in all 5 languages, but one of them speaks more deeply to us than the other 4. If you had to give up one, you'd give up this one, or this one, but not this one. That's the one that really makes you feel love. That is your primary love language. It's very similar to spoken language. Every one of us grows up speaking a language with a dialect, okay? I grew up speaking English, Southern style, but everyone grows up speaking a language with a dialect, and that's the one you understand best. The same is true with love. Now, once in a while, someone says to me, I don't know, Gary, I think 2 of those are just about equal for me. And my response? Fine, we'll give you 2 love languages. We'll call you bilingual. But most of us have a primary love language, a secondary love language, and then the other 3 fall in line under that. In marriage, almost never does a husband and wife have the same love language. It happens, but not very often. And by nature, we speak our own language. We do what would make us feel love. For example, here's a young gal who grew up in a home where she didn't feel much love from her father. But every morning her father would say, I love you, honey, have a good day. Words of affirmation. But if she didn't feel love, then words of affirmation was not her love language. So she's married now, but she doesn't feel loved by her husband. But if she says to him, I just feel like you don't love me, he will likely say to her, don't love you? What are you talking about? That's the first thing I say every morning. And every afternoon when I come home, that's what I tell you, I love you. What do you mean I don't love you? But you see, her love language may be acts of service. If so, what she's feeling is, You know, I'm tired of I love you, I love you. If you love me, why don't you do something to help me around here? Look at you watching television while I work. What's this all about? You see, she doesn't feel loved even though he is sincere. I believe there are literally thousands of couples who are as sincere as they can be. They are loving each other, but they're not speaking the right love language. And consequently, the love tank is empty. Now, what if the love language of your spouse is something that doesn't come natural for you? And my answer is, so you learn to speak it. My wife's love language is acts of service. One of the things I do for her is vacuum the floors. Now, you don't know me well, but I want to ask you, do you think that vacuuming floors comes natural for me? My mother made me vacuum all through junior high and high school. I couldn't go play ball on Saturday until I vacuumed the house. In those days, I said to myself, if I ever get out of here, one thing I'm not going to do, I am not going to vacuum floors. You could not pay me enough to vacuum floors. There's only one reason I vacuum floors. L-O-V-E. You see, when it doesn't come natural, it's a greater expression of love. My wife knows every time I vacuum the floor, it's nothing but 100% pure, unadulterated love, and I get credit for the whole thing. You see, I don't vacuum floors for me. Fuzzy balls don't bother me. I can walk all over. Once a year is all I would ever need to vacuum for me. I vacuum every week for her. Love is something you do for somebody else, not something you do for yourself. So how do you discover your spouse's primary language? Well, in the book, we have a profile that will help you, but let me give you some ideas. You ask this question: how do they most often express love to others? Observe their behavior. If they're hugging everybody they see, physical touch is probably their language. Second question, what do they complain about most often? Their complaint reveals the heart. If they say to you, we don't ever spend any time together, they're telling you that quality time is their language. And then number three, what do they request most often of you? If you're going on a business trip and they say to you, be sure and bring me a surprise, they're telling you that gifts is their language. Now, how does all of this work with children? Well, the first 3 years of the child's life, you pour on all five. You give them all five. But about 3 or 4 years of age, you can discover a child's love language by simply observing how they relate to you. If when you walk in the door, they grab you by the leg, physical touch is probably their language. Or you walk in the door and they invite you to their room, I want to show you my artwork, then quality time is probably their language. What do they request most often of you? If they say, Daddy, would you come in the backyard and play ball with me? They're asking you for quality time. And then you observe how they relate to other children. Just watch them. If they're always giving encouraging words to other children, you will probably know that is their love language, words of affirmation. I learned my son's love language when he was about 4. When I would come home in the afternoon, I would sit down on the couch, he'd come in and jump up on my lap, and he'd mess up my hair. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Now, my daughter's love language was quality time. So when I would come home, she would say to me, Daddy, come into my room. I want you to see this. Daddy, come into my room. She was asking me for quality time. So as she got older, junior high and high school, she and I would take walks together every day after, not every day, 2 or 3 days a week after dinner. After I wash dishes for my wife, because her language is acts of service, remember? My son would never walk with me. He said, walking is dumb. You're not going anywhere. If you're going somewhere, drive. Now, what I'm trying to say is this. The whole concept I'm sharing with you is that if we learn to speak the love language of our spouse and of our children, we change the emotional climate in the family. What I've shared with you could literally save thousands of marriages. In fact, my files are filled with letters and emails from all over the world because this book is translated now in 38 languages. And people say, we were that close to divorce, and somebody gave us your book, and it opened our eyes, and we started speaking the right language, and our whole marriage was reborn. I believe thousands of marriages could be saved if we understood this concept. Now, what I want to do is dig a little deeper into these languages with you. And I want to begin with words of affirmation. because each of these languages also has dialects. And one of the dialects of words of affirmation is compliments. Mark Twain said that he could live for 2 months on a good compliment. Now, I guess that would mean that 6 a year would be enough for him, but probably not for your spouse if you're married, okay? Charlie Shedd said that he gave his wife a different compliment every day for a whole year. I guess maybe one day he said, your left eye is beautiful, and the next day your right eye. A whole year, compliments. But there's another dialect, and that's called encouraging words. The word encourage means to instill courage. You know, a lot of us have ideas of things we would like to do, but we've never had the courage to try them. For example, writing a magazine article, or learning to ski, or learning to lose weight. And sometimes simply an encouraging word from your spouse may help them accomplish something that they've been wanting to do for a long time. Now let me say just a word about this losing weight thing. If you're going to encourage them, you're encouraging them to do something that they have expressed the desire to do. You see, you don't come in 16 times a month and say, you need to lose weight. But if they say, you know, I need to lose some weight, then you can say, well, honey, you know, I know you've been talking about that program, and if you want to get in it, I know you'll be successful, because one of the things I like about you is when you start something, you always complete it. And your encouragement might help them do what they already want to do. But there's another dialect, and that is kind words. This has to do with the manner in which we speak. There's a Hebrew proverb which says, a soft answer turns away anger. Do you know we don't have to scream at each other? Screaming is a learned phenomenon. It can be unlearned. You can say anything you want to say softly. You can even say negative things softly. You can say, honey, I really felt hurt tonight when you didn't volunteer to help me. So you're sharing something that's painful, but you're sharing it in a positive way, in a loving way. Love is kind. And then love makes requests, not demands. Love says, honey, you know those apple pies you make? Would it be possible for you to make an apple pie this week? I love your apple pies. Love doesn't say, hadn't had an apple pie since a baby was born. Don't guess I'm going to get any more apple pies for 18 years. Now, doesn't that motivate you? If you had a pie, you'd throw it at him. Love says, honey, you know what I would like? You know what would make me happy? Love makes requests, not demands. You see, when you request something of your spouse, you bring in the element of choice. You're simply giving them information. If you wanted to do something that would be helpful for me, here's something that would be helpful. So you're giving them information. But love is always a choice. We don't demand things of our spouses or anyone else. We simply give them information. Now, what if this love language, words of affirmation, is very difficult for you? You didn't receive words growing up, and so they're very hard for you to give words. Let me give you some ideas. Make a list of some things you like about your spouse. It may be a short list, it may be a long list, and then write a sentence about each one of those things. And stand in front of the mirror and read those sentences. Then pick one, walk in the room where your spouse is, and simply say it. You can run if you want to after you say it. Just say it and run. But the next time will be easier, and the third time will be even easier. Another idea is get you a notebook and write down affirming words you hear other people say. Or when you're reading a magazine article or a book, write down the words you read in the magazine or the book and keep you a list of these words and say them in front of the mirror until they become comfortable. And then you go share them with your spouse. Or you could write a love note. For some people, writing words is easier than speaking words. And so you might try that in the beginning. Write the words, and then you later come to say the words. Words of affirmation is a powerful communicator of love. And when you speak it, you give life to your spouse. But I want to challenge you, if this is your spouse's primary language, give them heavy doses of words of affirmation. And if it's not their primary, you can still sprinkle in words of affirmation. None of us object to receiving words that affirm our worth. It's an expression of love. Well, let's review. We said that fundamentally there are 5 ways to express love emotionally in a marriage relationship or to children or any other relationship, and that every one of us has a primary love language. And if you want to be successful in filling the love tank of the other person, you have to learn to speak their love language. Now, we've dug a little deeper with words of affirmation. Now we're going to dig deeper with quality time. Quality time, giving the person your undivided attention. You know, there are some men who believe that they can watch television, read a magazine article, and hear everything their wife says. And actually, they can. But that is not quality time. Quality time, the TV is off, the magazine is down, you're looking at them and giving them your undivided attention. I remember a couple who came to me some years ago, and they walked in together, and the wife said to me, "Dr. Chapman, we want you to know up front that we don't have any money problems. We've read that money is a big problem in marriages, but we don't have any money problems. We've both worked through the years, and our house is paid for, and we don't have any money problems. And we want you also to know that we don't argue with each other. We don't believe in arguing. We've seen our friends argue. We don't believe in that." And I'm beginning to think, is this woman coming in here to give me a progress report on her marriage? Sounds pretty good to me. And then she said, "The problem is, Dr. Chapman, I just don't feel any love coming from him." She said, "It's like we're roommates living in the same house. And it's just dead." Well, I looked at him and he said, "I don't understand her. I do everything I know to do to make her feel loved, and yet she sits there and tells you what she's been telling me. She doesn't feel loved." He said, "I don't know what else to do." I said, "Well, what have you been doing?" He said, "I come home before she does, and I start the evening meal. I have it ready most days when she gets home." And he said, "After it's over," he said, "if I don't have a meeting, I wash the dishes." And he said, "Every Saturday I wash the car and I mow the lawn." And he said, "I help her with the laundry," and I'm beginning to wonder, what does this woman do? And he said, "I do all these things to show her that I love her, and yet she sits there and tells you she doesn't feel loved." And he said, "I don't know what else to do for her." Well, I came back to her, and she said, "Dr. Chapman, he's right. He does all those things. He's a hard-working man." She said, "But Dr. Chapman, we don't ever talk. We hadn't talked in 30 years. You understand what's going on? The woman is dying for quality time, and he's giving her acts of service. I believe there are thousands of couples just like that. Now, many people have trouble with this language, quality time. They can talk on the run, but they have difficulty with quality conversation. And that's the dialect this woman is asking for, quality conversation. So let me suggest to you that if this is your spouse's language, you set a time to talk, a daily sharing time in which you share with each other a minimum of 3 things that happen in your life today and how you feel about them. Don't forget the feelings. It's just a minimum, a daily sharing time with your spouse. And remember, when you're talking with your spouse in quality conversation, you maintain eye contact. You don't look at the floor or the ceiling. You look at them. And don't be doing anything else. Put everything else aside. Also observe their body language. If their fists are clenched or if there's tears coming to their eyes, it means they're really serious or they're really hurting. And don't interrupt them. You know, one research project indicated that the average person will listen 17 seconds before they interrupt and give their idea. And when you interrupt, you say to them, what you're saying is not important. Or you're saying, I got it, let me tell you how to fix it. Don't interrupt, listen to them. And then recognize that there are personality differences when it comes to talking. I like to think that there are 2 types when it comes to talking. One is the Dead Sea. You know, the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea and it goes nowhere. Well, there are those of us who can have all kind of thoughts and feelings and experiences flowing into our lives throughout the day. We have a large reservoir where we store all of that, and we're perfectly happy not to talk. In fact, if you say to a Dead Sea, what's wrong? Why aren't you talking tonight? A Dead Sea will say, nothing's wrong. What makes you think something's wrong? And they're being perfectly honest. It's just that they are content not to talk. On the other side is what I call the Babbling Brook. And that's the personality type, that whatever comes in the eye gate or the ear gate comes out the mouth gate. And normally, there's not 60 seconds between the two. Whatever they see, whatever they hear, they tell. In fact, if no one is at home, they will call someone on the telephone. You know what I just saw? And if they can't get someone on the telephone, they talk to themselves. And usually, the Dead Sea will marry the Babbling Brook. So what I'm saying is this. If you're married to a Dead Sea, they will never become a Babbling Brook. And if you're married to a Babbling Brook, they will never become a Dead Sea. But we can move toward the center. The Dead Sea can learn to talk more. The Babbling Brook can learn to slow the flow and ask more questions. Any couple can have good communication, good quality communication. But there's another dialect of quality time, and that is quality activities. Planting flowers together. Going to a ball game together, or walking through the old neighborhood where one of you grew up and asking questions. What are some of your memories from your childhood that were pleasant? Do you have any painful memories from your childhood? You know, that kind of experience, walking through the neighborhood, can bring out things you've never heard before about them. It touches emotions, and you're likely to have an activity, but you're also likely to have conversation. Or you can ride bikes together, assuming you both like to ride bikes. Or go on a picnic. Or in the winter, you can go ice skating. The important thing is not what you're doing. The important thing is you are doing it together. Now, if your spouse complains, we don't ever spend any time together. They're telling you that quality time is their language, and if you will say to them, honey, what would you like to do? And you respond, you're filling up their love tank. You're speaking the language of quality time. Now, let's look and dig a little deeper with receiving gifts. We said it's universal to receive gifts. A gift is a visible sign of love. You know, when we get married, typically, we exchange rings. The ring is a gift. And the person performing the wedding will likely say something like, these rings are outward and visible signs of an inward and spiritual bond which unites your two hearts in love that has no end. Now, that's not just rhetoric. The gift is a symbol of your love for each other. That's why when couples sometimes who aren't getting along very well will take their wedding band off, it's a symbol of rejection. And especially if gifts is their primary love language. You see, the symbol has emotional meaning. Now, gifts mean more to some people than they do to other people. And that's why, you know, sometimes a guy will give his wife a gift and she doesn't really just light up and, you know, dance on the floor, and he said, well, it costs a lot of money, and she act like I didn't do anything. Well, it may not be her love language, but if it is, it really won't matter what you give. It's going to be important. We said earlier it's the thought that counts. But it also helps if you will recognize that there are certain kinds of gifts that she really appreciates more than other kind of gifts. Now, there are people who will say, well, I'm not a gift giver. I never learned to give gifts. I never received many gifts. Well, the good news is this is easy to learn. This language you can learn. Make a list of the gifts you've heard her comment on in the past that other people have given her. That'll give you a clue on the kind of gifts she appreciates. Or you could recruit sister or brother of your spouse. They know them. They know what they would like, and they'd be glad to spend your money and buy them a gift. Or you could also get a gift notebook. You know, while you're watching the channel on TV that's selling all the things, you could, and she said, oh, I'd like to have that. You know, write it down. Or looking through a catalog, write it down. Keep a list of those things. Now, some of you will have to change your attitude about money if this is your spouse's language. You know, there are spenders and there are savers. And spenders will have no difficulty buying gifts, but savers will. Because to them, they're saying, well, I don't buy myself gifts. Why should I buy them gifts? You know? Well, the fact is you do give yourself gifts. If you're a saver, and so you're saving, investing money, you're giving yourself the gift of self-worth and security. But you're not giving your spouse the gift of love. Look at it this way. Giving a gift, if this is your spouse's language, giving a gift is an investment in your marriage. It'll be one of the best investments you've ever made. But there's also the gift of presence, your physical presence. and particularly in times of celebration and crisis. I remember the wife who said to me, "My husband loves softball more than he loves me." And I said, "Why would you say that?" She said, "Because when our baby was born, as soon as the baby was born, he left to go play softball. He loved softball more than me." You see, his presence there in that moment of celebration meant a lot to her. Now, his story was, "I just wanted to tell the guys that I had a baby." Well, I understand that, but presence was important to her. If your spouse calls you on the phone when you're out of town and they say, "I just got news that my mom is at the point of death," or some family member is really, really sick, don't ask, "Do you want me to come home?" You just say, "Honey, I'll be home as soon as I can get there." They will never forget the gift of your presence. On the other hand, if you don't come home, they'll probably never forget that either. The gift of presence, it's powerful. Now let's look at acts of service. Doing something for the other person that you know they really would like for you to do. Again, the old saying is, actions speak louder than words. And that's true for some people. Not all people. It's not true for me, for example. Words speak more deeply to me than actions. I'd much rather hear my wife say how great I am than to do something for me. But for my wife, acts of service is her language. It's actions speak louder than words from her. I can say to her, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and she'll say, "I'm sick and tired of it. I love you, I love you. Do something." So acts of service speaks louder to her. Now, a part of our problem in speaking this language is stereotypes. Sometimes the society has men stereotyped certain things they do and certain things women do. And sometimes it's your mother and father who gave you a pattern. And so, some of us grow up with ideas of men don't wash dishes or women don't mow the lawn or whatever. And I'm not trying to change stereotypes. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to help us love each other. And I'm going to tell you this, no matter what the stereotype is, if my wife's love language is acts of service and washing dishes is one of her dialects, I'm going to wash the dishes. Why? I want to live with a happy woman. So what I'm saying is we might have to break the stereotypes, but we can do it. And giving information about what would be meaningful to you is really important for your spouse. Because they could spend a whole day painting a bedroom where you wanted them to be planting the bushes. So I'm painting the bedroom thinking I'm doing a great act of service for my spouse, and she's thinking, that could have waited. I wish this is the time to do the bushes. So you need to give them information. In fact, I've suggested to people that you make especially if this is the love language of your spouse, let them make a list of 10 things that they would like for you to do. 10 things that would really speak love to them, and put them in order of priority. Number 1 is most important, down to number 10. That way, they will be working on number 1 instead of working on number 10. It's just good information to give your spouse. Now, we're talking here about major projects, painting and shrubs and cleaning the garage and those kind of things. But also, there are daily acts of service and there are weekly acts of service. So it would be a good idea if you made a list of 2 or 3 things that you would like for your spouse to do every day, such as taking out the trash or walking the dog or changing the baby's diaper or, something that would be meaningful to you, and maybe something every week that they could do for you. Now, I know that some of these things are hard for certain people because they're just not geared this way. But again, we can learn to do that. I told you my wife's language is acts of service. I vacuum floors, not for me, but for her. And if that didn't make her feel loved, I wouldn't vacuum floors. I'd be doing something else. You remember the couple I told you earlier who came in and had no money problems and no arguments? Let me give you the other side of that story. I said to him, I'd like to change the subject. Could you tell me what would be an ideal wife in your mind? And he said, you really want to know? And I said, yeah, tell us. He said, I've dreamed about this. He said, what would be ideal? That she would come home and fix dinner for me, and then she'd wash dishes, and then she'd sew the buttons on my shirt. And his wife broke in and said, I'm not believing you. You told me you like to cook. He said, darling, I don't mind cooking, but the man asked me what would be ideal. You see, I knew the man's love language. Why was he doing all those things for her? That was his love language. So, and when the couple finally got it, he said to me, you know, I wish I'd have known this 20 years ago. I could have been sitting on the couch talking to her instead of doing all this stuff. And she said, honey, I don't mind fixing a meal. And they went home and started speaking the right love language. And in 2 months, they sent me a letter and said, Dr. Chapman, our marriage has never been so good. We finally learned how to speak each other's language. Acts of service. It's powerful for some people. And then there's physical touch. This is the one the guys have been waiting for. A lot of the guys say, oh, that's my language, physical touch. But they're thinking sex. And when I say to them, let me ask you, would non-sexual touches be loving for you? And they say, non-sexual? I say, yeah. If your wife is pouring a cup of coffee and she puts her hand on your shoulder, do you feel loved? Or when you get out of the car and she holds hands with you, do you feel loved? If non-sexual touches do not communicate emotional love to you, then physical touch is not your language. It's probably something else. But not all touches are of equal value. It depends on the dialect, the touches you give. You know, there are explicit touches and there are implicit touches. Explicit takes total effort and time, like back rubs, or foot massages, or the whole foreplay in intercourse. And then the implicit touches, you can just rub your arm against theirs when you walk around the room, or just pat them on the back. Or if you want extra credit, when there's a crowd in the house or you're in public, you walk up and just give them a little hug and kiss on the cheek. Woo! Their love tank fills up if this is their primary love language. And the more you touch, the easier it becomes. People say to me, well, Gary, I'm just not a toucher. Didn't grow up in a touchy-feely family, just not a toucher. And my answer is, do you have 2 hands? Can you put them together? Just imagine that you get your spouse in the middle. And I bet if you hug them about 10,000 times, it'll begin to feel more comfortable. But ultimately, we're not talking comfort. We're talking love. And love is something you do for somebody else. And every time you touch, it becomes easier and easier. And you learn how to speak this language. And what happens? The love tank of your spouse fills up. So what we're saying is this, that whatever your spouse's primary love language is, you want to give them heavy doses of that. You want to sprinkle in the other 4. And when you do, their love tank fills up. The whole climate in the marriage begins to change. I know that some of you are saying, well, Gary, yeah, but there's too many things that have happened. Too much stuff has gone on. And so, I don't know. Well, look, if you failed or if they failed, why don't you begin by giving an apology? Why don't you begin by saying, you know, I realize that I have not met your needs very well, and I really want to do better. Maybe they'll forgive you, maybe they won't. But you at least reach out to try to tear down the wall. And then, whether they forgive you or whether they don't, you start speaking their love language. You start giving them heavy doses of their primary love language. And what happens, they begin to see things really are changing with you. You really are different. And in a little while, they're going to be saying to you, what's going on? And you can just simply say, I'm just trying to learn to be a better spouse. And when they see the sincerity and they see it expressed in a language that's meaningful to them, what happens is the climate changes between the 2 of you. It works with children, it works in a marriage, it works in all human relationships. And I want to challenge you to learn the primary love language of your spouse and speak it regularly. Yes, it requires work. Yes, it requires a willingness to sacrifice. But is that not what love is all about? It's giving yourself for the benefit of the other person. And we're going to talk about another way in which the word love is often misunderstood, and that is romantic love, and more particularly the concept of being in love. I often talk to young couples who are thinking about marriage, and I will say to them, why do you all want to get married? And whatever else they tell me, they always give me the big reason. And the big reason is always the same. What do they say? We love each other. And then I ask them a very unfair question. I say, tell me, what do you mean by that? And they'll reach over and hold hands and giggle, and then one of them, whichever one talks the most, and always one does, one of them will say, well, you know. And I guess I know. I remember years ago I went to my mother and I said, Mom, how do you know when you're really in love? And my mother said what many mothers have said through the years. Son, if it's real, you'll know it. Well, I like my mother, but that didn't help me. And the fact is, we don't help young people very much. Everybody seems to agree that the main thing you want to make certain of is that you're in love. But nobody bothers to tell you how you know that. Now, I want to try to shed some light on the subject. This kind of love begins with a feeling. I call it the tingles. Inside every one of us, there's a little love alert system. It's similar to a smoke alarm. And when you see certain people, there's something about the way they look, something about the way they talk, something about the way they emote that gives you a little tingle inside. It's the tingles actually that motivate people to go out for a hamburger. And you know, sometimes you actually lose the tingles on the first date. You find out something about them that you can't tolerate, and the next time they call you for a hamburger, you're not hungry, and that relationship never gets off the ground. But there are other relationships that every time you go out for a hamburger, it gets tinglier and tinglier and tinglier. And one night, one of you will say something like this. You know, I think I could love you. We're testing the watchers to see if they feel what we feel. And if they give you a positive response, such as, what would be so bad about that? Ooh, you have a tender evening, and the next time the moon is right, you will actually say the words, I love you. And you wait for them to say, I love you too. Woo! Now you know you got it because you said it out loud. And from that moment on, you literally get obsessed with each other. You can't get them off your mind. You go to bed thinking about them. You wake up thinking about them. All day long you think about them. They are the most wonderful person you've ever met in your life. Now, your mother can see their flaws, but you can't. Your mother will say, honey, have you considered they haven't had a steady job in 5 years? And you will say, Mama, give them a break. They're just waiting for the right opportunity. Now, as a student of anthropology, I asked myself, is this simply a Western phenomena? And so I began to do some research, and I found that this is found in an ancient Hebrew document that I ran across. I want you to listen. Now, the culture is a little different, but I want you to listen to the words of a woman who's in love. Here's what she says. My lover is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Line up 10,000 men, and he'll stand out above all of them. His head is pure as gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His arms are rods of gold. His body like polished ivory, decorated with sapphires. His legs are pillars of marble, set on bases of pure gold. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my lover. This is my friend. She's in love. He's altogether lovely. No flaws in this guy. And then I read further, and here's what the man said. This is a man in love. Listen to what he says. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your hair is like a flock of goats. That's pretty contemporary. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn. Each has a twin. Not one of them is alone. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go up to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. All beautiful you are, my darling. There is no flaw in you. Woo! He's in love. And when you're in love, you have all these illusions that you later find out are not true, but you feel like they're true. For example, you feel like when you're in love that you have an intimate relationship. You really, really, really feel like you have an intimate relationship. And later on, you wake up to realize we hardly know each other. And it also gives you the illusion that it's going to last forever. You're going to be this happy forever. And it blinds us to our differences. That's why I say to young couples, you know, when they're thinking about marriage, what kind of music do you listen to? I remember the wife who came back 18 months after marriage and said to me, he listens to that dumb Western country music all day long. It drives me up the wall. Well, don't you think she could have found that out before they got married? So what kind of music do you listen to? What are your values? You know, what kind of grades did you make in school? All these things are important. But this in-love thing blinds us to all of those things. And the euphoria leads us to wrong conclusions. You know, we've studied this in-love thing now, done long-term studies, and we've discovered that the average lifespan of the in-love obsession is 2 years. Some a little longer, some a little less, average 2 years. And we come down off the high. Well, let's be thankful for that. If we didn't come down, you'd have to close down business, industry, education. You can't get anything done. You in love? Being in love is next door to being insane. If you're in college and you fall in love, your grades are going down. You got a test on the War of 1812. Who cares about the War of 1812 when you're in love? Now, I want to ask you a question. Do you think this in-love experience has any relationship to the divorce rate in this country? I believe it is directly tied to the divorce rate. Let me give you a picture of what happens. A couple falls in love. They get obsessed with each other. They get married. 2 years, they come down. Remember, they fell in love before they got married, so it might be 6 months into the marriage they come down. And then they realize they have differences. They emerge. How well do I remember that in my marriage? You see, when I got married, I had all these visions about how wonderful it was going to be. I mean, I was going to be so happy with this woman. I was in graduate school, and I had this visual image that at night I would come home, and after dinner, I'd sit at the table and study, and my wife would be sitting on the couch. And when I finished studying, I would lift my eyes, and our eyes would touch. Ooh, won't that be nice? A woman right there. Ooh. But after we got married, I found out that my wife did not want to sit on the couch and watch me study. If I'm going to study, she wanted to go downstairs, the apartment complex, and talk to people. I'm up there by myself thinking, this is what it was like before we got married. And before we got married, I had this idea that every night, about 10:30, we were going to go to bed together. Woo! Gonna go to bed with a woman every night at 10:30. Woo! But after we got married, I found out it had never crossed her mind to go to bed with anybody at 10:30. Her idea was, about 10:30, you come up from visiting people and you sit there and read a book till midnight. And I'm thinking, why didn't you read the book while I read the book? Then we could go to bed together. And before we got married, I had this idea that every morning when the sun gets up, everybody gets up. But after we got married, I found out my wife didn't do mornings. It didn't take me long not to like her, and it didn't take her long not to like me. And we succeeded in being utterly miserable. But you know what I found out? Our experience is pretty common. Most couples get married and come down off the high and then discover the differences they didn't know. And many of them end up arguing, but they don't get things resolved. Or they withdraw and stay away from each other. And then later they conclude, we shouldn't have gotten married. We're just too different. We're not compatible. And then what happens? One of them gets the tingles for somebody else, and the whole thing starts over again. May I show you how this happens? It started yesterday morning. Maybe with somebody you know. Their marriage is not going well. They've lost the tingles. They've argued. Maybe they've just stopped arguing now. They're just living in the same house. But yesterday morning, the husband went to work. Could have been the wife, just as easily. 8:30 yesterday morning, he did what he does every morning. He went to get his coffee. But yesterday, when he was getting his coffee, this lady walked up to the coffee pot and said to him, "Good morning." Ooh, kindest words he's heard in months. Good morning. 8:30 in the morning, and her hair is combed, and she smells good. And right away, he feels a tingle. He goes back to work, and about 10:30, he sees her going for coffee, and he gets thirsty. "Are you new around here?" "Oh, what's your name?" Where are you from? Oh, you know my friend, he used to work over there. A little coffee pot conversation. And the next few days, he will arrange for a few more coffee pot rendezvous. And if he thinks that she might be feeling what he's feeling, he will say to her, how about lunch someday? And so they have lunch. And on the first lunch, he tells her what it's like at his house. Just so she knows where he's coming from, married but unhappy. And then the next lunch, she tells him her story. Every woman has a story, a history. And then they start having lunches regularly and sharing about life. And 2 months down the road, he says to himself, man, I feel closer to this woman than I do my wife. We've been married 15 years. I don't have anything else to say to her, but it's easy to talk to this lady. It's like we're on the same wavelength. And then he will say to her, I know a really nice place for dinner if you would ever be interested. And if she is, he will take her to a nice restaurant. I mean one that has fresh flowers and candles on every table. I'm talking nice restaurant. And many times after that first dinner, they will have an after-dinner rendezvous. Ooh. And a few more dinners and a few more rendezvous. And he is saying to himself, oh, I don't know how my mother's going to handle this. And if he has children, he will say, I don't want to hurt my kids. That's the last thing I want to do is hurt my children. And then he will say, but you know it couldn't be good for the kids to be in our marriage and see the way we treat each other. You know that couldn't be good for the kids. And 2 months later, he leaves his wife and goes off with this lady. Why? Because he lost the tingles here. In fact, I'll tell you what he'll say at that point. I don't think we ever loved each other. We were too young. We didn't know what we were doing. It really should never have happened. Oh, but this lady, she's a 10. Now, his friends can see her flaws. His friends will say, George, have you considered the woman's been married 7 times before? And George will say, give her a break, man. She married losers. I'm going to make the woman happy. She deserves to be happy. But you see, George doesn't know that 2 years he'll come down off the high. And he will discover why 7 other men left her. And she will discover that he's not Mr. Perfect, and the whole thing starts over again. You know why I know that's not the road to walk? First marriages in this country, 40% end in divorce. Second marriages, 60% end in divorce. Third marriages, 75% end in divorce. The answer is not running. The answer is learning how to love the person to whom you're now married. You see, if you follow the tingles, you could get married 6, 8, 10, or 12 times in a lifetime, just like they do in Hollywood. But you're not that rich. So what I'm saying is this. The greatest potential for your happiness is with the person to whom you're now married. Now, I know there are many people in our audience here and listening who've been married more than once. We can't go backwards, okay? We have to be where we are. But what I'm challenging you to is this. Let's learn to love the person to whom you're now married. I believe that thousands of marriages could be saved if people learned the concept of the 5 love languages. For me, this is not a theory. This is my life. I told you earlier, my wife and I had tremendous struggles in our marriage. And unfortunately, it went on for a long time. But when I finally learned her love language and how to communicate love to her, our marriage radically changed. 3 questions helped me learn her love language. They're simple questions, but they changed my marriage. Question number 1, what could I do to help you? Question number 2, how could I make your life easier? Question number 3, how could I be a better husband to you? Do you know when I was willing to ask those 3 questions, my wife was willing to give me an answer. She told me. And when I let her teach me how to love her, do you know what happened? Not overnight, but within 3 months, my wife started asking me those 3 questions. We've been walking this road a long time, and I have an absolutely incredible wife. In fact, I said to her not long ago, you know, Carolyn, if every woman in the world was like you, there would never be a divorce. Why would a man leave a woman who's doing everything she can to help him? And my goal through these years has been to so love my wife that when I'm gone, she will never find another man to treat her the way I've treated her. The woman's going to miss me. And you know what I believe? I believe this was what marriage was designed for. Listen, marriage was never designed to make people miserable. Marriage was designed for the husband to learn to live and love and serve his wife, and her to live and serve him. And what happens when you do this, you both become winners. You see, in the early days of our marriage, we were both losers. I shot her, she shot me. We stayed wounded most of the time. We resented each other. But whenever we started loving, and you see what happens? Love stimulates love. When I started loving her in the right love language, she responded to that. Love is the most powerful weapon we have to change a marriage. You understand what I'm saying? The potential to change the world is in what I've shared with you. If we can learn in our marriages to love our spouses and love our children in the right love language, we can change the climate of marriage and family in this country. And I want to challenge you to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. Love is the most powerful weapon we have for good, and it will help us transform marriages and families. So I'm challenging you to learn the primary love language of your spouse. Give them heavy doses of that. Sprinkle in the other 4 for extra credit. And what happens is you both live with a full love tank. And when you do the same thing with your children, heavy doses of primary, sprinkle in the other 4, they come to adulthood knowing how to speak all 5 languages and knowing how to receive love in all 5 languages. That is the healthiest child, is the one who comes to adulthood knowing how to speak all of these languages. You see, most of us did not grow up receiving love in all 5 languages. Most of us got 1 or 2 or 3. And as adults, we have to learn them. But if we teach our children all 5 languages, they come to adulthood, and it's much easier for them when they get married because now they can learn to speak their spouse's language. In fact, many single adults live with an empty love tank. They're in my office, I'm going to say every week, but every month for sure. 25, 30 years of age, never been married, and say to me, Dr. Chapman, I never felt loved by my parents. Did the parents love them? My guess is yes. The problem? They never expressed love in a language that child felt. So now they've come to adulthood, still feeling unloved by their parents. Love has the power to change all of that. I've said to those single adults, would you be willing to love your parents in the right language and see what happens? And over again, I've seen them reach out and bridge a gap and speak the love language of their parents. And I've seen their parents warm up and reciprocate. Any relationship, marriage, family, any relationship can be enhanced if we learn people's love language and we choose to speak it. My hope is that our time together will help all of us here in the studio and our watching audience to respond to the significant people in your life with love. Nothing has the potential to change the world like love.